Kia ora tātou katoa, nau mai, haere mai, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Greetings from the Christchurch Transitional Cathedral in New Zealand. Thank you, Dean Andrew, for your invitation to contribute to this series of reflections on the coronavirus pandemic from around the Anglican Communion, bringing voices together from around the world. I am serving as Dean in this Diocese of Christchurch, and this is a diocese which is no stranger to disasters, especially natural disasters of one kind or another. In September 2010, just under 10 years ago, we had a 7.1 magnitude earthquake here, which also set off a whole series of aftershocks which lasted the next year or so, that caused widespread serious damage to our city and to the province of Canterbury beyond. Thankfully, the recovery of the city of Christchurch and its surrounds is well underway now. But the reason I mention it is because of the way the people of Christchurch responded in the midst of a natural disaster, and we learned a great deal. One of the big issues when nature takes over is the feeling of utter loss of control and a sense of powerlessness. Going through that was a painful experience for lots of people, for most of us, on many levels. But there was one aspect of the way people responded that was something of a minor miracle, especially in the early days just after the first major quake. Neighbours who barely knew each other reached out to one another with acts of care and compassion and kindness. They shared water and resources and food, and they generally did all sorts of things to help one another out. And there was a palpable sense of community, of people coming together with acts of kindness and compassion to help one another out in difficult times. It was really quite a wonderful and positive part of what was otherwise a difficult story. And that was where God was to be found, as people connected and came together with a kind of a sense of gratitude for the life that they had. And people began to reprioritise what was important. And what was more important than anything else was people. We looked out for one another in ways that we didn't do before. We valued people that we hadn't noticed before, especially the sewage workers who worked to make sure that all our broken underground pipes could be pumped out and made to work again, and also the water supply maintenance people and the electricity workers and people like that, because they made it possible for us to stay alive and also to stay healthy and well. That sense of community is an enduring memory for many of us who came through those times. So when the pandemic arrived, we already had a good idea of what to do, which was to put people and communities first and make saving lives our priority. Our government moved early to implement a strategy of elimination of the virus, and our country went into lockdown late in March, and that lasted for about 6 weeks or so until late April, early May. Now, we have the advantage of being an isolated island nation, and the distances between us and other countries are vast. So I imagine that has made our particular approach to stamping out the coronavirus perhaps easier than it might be for other contexts. During the lockdown, we went through the same kinds of checklists that we had worked out in our post-earthquake period. We asked ourselves, who are the people around us who are most likely to be vulnerable in a situation of lockdown? Who doesn't have a computer or another device? Who's going to need to be contacted by phone? Who's going to need help getting food and groceries and essentials? Which households will struggle to keep 2 jobs going while still educating their children? And what are the ways that we can reach out and keep people connected with a sense of belonging and community in a situation where isolation could easily overpower people? And these are the questions that we began to ask. So that was one thing, and in the cathedral we put quite a lot of effort into that, and I know that many of our parishes and diocesan clergy did the same. The second priority for us was keeping the cathedral as a presence in the city as a house of prayer. Moving services to an online format was, I found, terrifying initially. It meant discovering new ways to communicate and new ways to be present to others. But the exciting aspect was that all sorts of people emerged with gifts that we were until then quite unaware of. And they showed us how to use technology, how to make better use of light and of camera angles and so on. I discovered that my own wife, Elizabeth, who's with me now on the other side of this camera, was very, very good indeed at photography. And we found that people we didn't know were beginning to connect with our online presence. Now that our lockdown is over, for the time being anyway, you never know whether something might come up later, we're finding that we're not going back to the way things were before. Online services are continuing in some form, especially morning prayer, and we have quite a large gathering of people still gathering online daily to pray morning prayer with us. And in fact, we found that there were many people who expressed a strong desire for us to remain connected online, and people began to be quite generous with their resources to enable us to keep an online presence going. So that's caused us to change the way that we are doing things going forward, and we will probably never go back to exactly the way it was before COVID-19 arrived. In fact, one of the other consequences of the lockdown that we've noticed is that people have had time to reflect, and they have especially focused on their priorities in their life once again, just as we did after the earthquake. Some people have decided to change their commitments or reduce their commitments, and sometimes that has meant a reduced commitment to the church and other organisations. But there's been another positive outcome in that some people are making new commitments to Christ and to the church. And all of a sudden we have more people inquiring about their faith and thinking about baptism or confirmation than we have had for some time. And these are really exciting and hopeful conversations to be having. In New Zealand at the moment anyway, life feels as if we have gone back to normal, well, almost. We have no restrictions of movement around the country right now, no limit on the number of people allowed in the supermarket, no compulsory face masks or anything like that. Now the focus in terms of the pandemic has moved to stopping the virus coming in through our borders. And there's a lot of work going on to quarantine those who are coming into our country. And there's quite a few quite significant tensions there. We're not sure about how well the well-being of people in quarantine is being looked after. We're noticing that some people are trying to escape, and they are now being prosecuted. And when we hear some of the backstory to those people trying to escape, there is some wondering about how well the people are being looked after in terms of their well-being and human needs while they're in isolation. And then there are requests for compassionate exemptions from the quarantine requirements from people, for example, returning home to visit a dying relative or to attend a funeral, for instance. And our government's taking a pretty firm line on these, which means it's pretty hard to get a compassionate exemption, and that's causing some tensions and pain as well. But that is part of the hard reality of stopping this pandemic. It also means that our tourism sector is in trouble in this country, and there's still going to be many businesses who are struggling to see that they have a future and are wondering about what will happen to their income. And that includes this cathedral, in fact. Even though the economy has opened up again, schools are back, choirs can sing, there is still a great deal of uncertainty and anxiety. a spike in demand for mental health services is expected as people struggle with these issues. The nice thing is that our cathedral remains open. People are visiting as pilgrims. They're coming in to stop to pray. Music is pouring forth and the full variety of cathedral worship is underway. It's winter here now and it's dark in the evening. We have our annual Kids Fest on at the moment, which is put on by the local city council, and the cathedral has offered a service and some events as part of that. And so this place has been buzzing with children and young people during the day. Along with many others, we are seeking in these difficult times to be a sign of faith, hope and love in a world which needs it so much. Thanks be to God, and thank you very much.